Great. Well, thank you so much. My name is Jesse McWaters. I lead the World Economic Forum's work on innovation in financial services. And I think that to say that there has been a sea change in perceptions of innovation in financial services more broadly and blockchain more specifically would be perhaps the understatement of the day. When we launched our current project on innovation in financial services at Davos in 2014, we had a group for a private session, 50 of some of the most senior financial services executives in the world from some of the largest institutions. And generally, the agreed upon view was that they didn't really need to change very much. Robo-advisors, who the heck would let a computer make investment decisions for them? Why would you get money from an online marketplace? And blockchain, it's just for Silk Road and that sort of thing, right? A year later, this January, we brought largely that same group together. And to say that the tone in the room had changed really doesn't capture it. One Morgan Stanley analyst called it an environment of complacency changed to an environment of paranoia. And there was a real recognition in that room that there were serious problems that needed to be addressed, and that fundamentally there were two pillars. There was an enormous pressure for operational efficiency and cost reduction. And there was this challenge of a new millennial digitally enabled customer that was hard to understand, who had high expectations and who was very willing to explore niche solutions in sort of monoline products targeting interesting things. And I think what we've seen increasingly over the last 6 months is a recognition that blockchain and other distributed ledger technologies might hold the answer to, if not both of those questions, at least one. And we have here just a fantastic panel of people from large incumbent financial institutions doing interesting and exciting work in that space. And so I will, starting with, which way are we going to start? We start with Simon? We'll start with Simon. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this space and why you think it's exciting.
Sure. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you. So Barclays has made a name for itself in being one of the more innovative banks. Our customer surveys, we often find that people say to us, well, we don't expect any bank to innovate, but if a bank was going to innovate, it probably should be Barclays, which I guess makes us the least worst in an incumbent crowd, or at least that's as close as we can get. So we've been doing a number of things in the blockchain space, and I tried to split it into the why, how, what paradigm. And I think the disagreement over shared ledgers, distributed blockchains, tokens, permissioned, has kind of become a real talking point today. But we wanted to find the answer to that with an experimentation process. So let's start building. Let's start doing things. Let's see how we solve some of these business challenges that we've got. We've done that in a number of ways. We've invited blockchain startups into our accelerator, namely Everledger, Cefello, OgiDocs, Chainalysis, and of course, I'm forgetting one, Atlas as well. And we learned a tremendous amount. But what's been really powerful has been the cultural shift in the bank. Like you say, around about an inflection point of September last year, things really started to move to, OK, this is no longer something that I'm going to beat and ignore. It's the new silver bullet. And I kind of went from having to promote the technology to having to calm people down and say, we need to experiment with this. We need to figure stuff out. But actually, we can't go too crazy. And so you'll have seen that we announced an experiment with Cefello. Some outlets claimed that we were actually accepting Bitcoins when not. But the purpose of that experiment was to understand how do you make open, censorship-resistant payment types more compliant. And how do you make them work for corporates? How do you make them work for a bank? And there are, I think we announced 45 other experiments we have internally, and there will be many more, and there's a need to collaborate.
Morgan?
Great, thanks. My name is Morgan McKenney. I manage our cross-border payments business on the institutional side at Citi. And you all know payments is a rapidly evolving space, more rapidly evolving perhaps in our lifetime now. And as such, Debbie Burkeen talked earlier about what Citi Ventures is doing around blockchain, and one of those is innovation labs, working with innovation labs to do experiments, smart experiments, so exploring and learning. So we basically tried to ask the question, can blockchain help consensus ledger help in an institutional payment space where Citi, as context, has, operates in 100 countries, has 230 clearing memberships, makes payments in 140 currencies. So can we apply consensus ledger in the institutional space? So we set out on this experiment a few months ago and built on the work that we'd already been doing in the labs and those learnings, and really ran an experiment, and we tested a few hypotheses. And I think what I would highlight for the group here is what we really tried to do is test the technology and actually learn and understand how it would actually work in a banking context, in situ. So not using it, not exploring it in its petri dish where it's happy and lives happily, but how do we port it onto our systems and then assess, okay, how reliable is it? How secure is it? Does it operate the way we thought it would? So we did that as well as tested the business applicability, right? Can this improve our products and services in the institutional space? So we ran the experiment, tested these hypotheses, and I think the results, the learnings we had were many. I think the first is in this environment, blockchain worked generally as advertised on the tin, for an emerging technology. That was interesting. I think we learned it was very hard to port it onto our system. So, Debbie Perkeen highlighted the legacy, our infrastructure that lives at Citi. We have a ton of that, and really making it live in our systems, I think, will be a big challenge for us to adopt, and will take some time. I think the last point is it doesn't address the end-to-end, right? The last mile problem that you have, unless it's really a digital currency at the end versus a fiat currency. So, it can't solve the world's problems immediately in that context, but a lot of promising learning, I'd say, from the experiment.
Excellent. Cheryl?
Hi, I work for BNY Mellon, which is the largest custodian bank, and we also have a Treasury Services large cash correspondent banking business, and that's the business that I am in. So my feedback will be from that perspective. So as Morgan said, being in the payments business, many of the first use cases that were thrown out there is all about the cross-border initiatives and how blockchain can be applied so that, global payments will happen instantaneously to every country there is out there. So our approach is two-pronged, a little differently. We have worked very closely with our technology partners that support our business. And for one experiment, it's really with a partnership, looking at one of the companies out there that has a solution and seeing what that technology really means. Does it work? How would it be inserted? What are the benefits? What are the risks? And so we continue to explore money movement, both internally and cross-border, to see if that technology holds the promise that everyone keeps saying it does. The second part is our technologists have concurrently, something public as BK Coins, they have downloaded the software. I'm not a technologist, so they brought the blockchain technology internally, and they've been they put in this new system to move our own coins, BK coins. BK is our stock. So, how do we use the technology to get hands-on and to play with it so that we're both learning internally and externally checking out partnerships. And I think we're going to continue on, those two paths and probably more. We've identified a few other promising use cases. Again, the things that we're looking at is, can this technology, what will it do for the business strategy? There's a technology out there, but I think where my focus has been with my management team is, but what business strategy does it help us, go towards? Is it technology just for the sake of playing with technology isn't what we want to do. We want to make sure that there's a way to tie in this technology with the business strategy so there's a benefit to the organization and ultimately to our end customers.
Julio?
So in our case, well, I work with Santander, and Santander is, well, probably all these things we're talking about are quite relevant to a group like Santander. As you may know, we are quite international. We have substantial operations in 10 major markets, including Europe and Latin America, and a little bit of US as well. In our case, actually Santander is a group of independent financial subsidiaries. So we don't have the branch model like someone like Citi, for example, would have, which means that the cross-border stuff is actually like talking to other banks, right? So the distributed nature of all these technologies are particularly interesting and particularly applicable in our case. It's also, Santander is also quite commercial bank, right? We're a commercial bank. We have investment banking and so on, but we're mostly interested in commercial banking, retail banking, customer-facing applications and so on. And there's a lot of things we can benefit from all these technologies. We started with interest in payments, particularly cross-border payments. First, as a way to get instantaneous international payments with FX components between our subsidiaries, but later on talking to other banks. Then we got a lot more interested with smart contracts, everything related to, well, more complex stuff that you can use with the digital nature of money when you do it in this space. Things like, I don't know, more complex trade finance transactions when you can have like sensors measuring, accelerometers or humidity factors, something like that in Internet of Things kind of stuff that can be used as smart oracles, for example, and embed that into the smart transactions. These kind of things are quite interesting because we think we can, they can reshape a lot of the contracts and the stuff that we are doing today. Also, we're talking a lot to other banks, and this is I think this is something that is changing in the industry. As Simon was saying before, I think the tipping point was about Cybos last year. I remember before the summer getting in trouble with our communications department in the bank because I did something and it got to the press something that we were looking at. Anyway, my name, Santander, and Bitcoin appeared in the same sentence. And
Not a good thing.
I got, in Spanish we call our ears pulled. And in September, October, actually in Cybos, everything was, all the bankers were there, all the startups were there, and everybody was talking a lot about collaboration. And then banks started to take this a lot more seriously. The startups, particularly the Bitcoin startups, starting talking less about displacing the banks and redefining money and so on, and they started to talk more about how to use the distributed nature of the ledger and the digital aspects of money to actually help the banks and work together to transform the financial industry. And here we are now where even the smallest bank would have a blockchain lab, either secret or publicly announced.
Fantastic. So I think there's some really interesting stuff going on here. One of the things that I noticed that I think runs the gamut across all of your descriptions is this very scientific language of experimentation, often melded with collaboration with a variety of interesting fintech firms. I'm curious about what you feel your key learnings have been about what are the elements of a successful experiment. How do you make sure that you get what you need out of an experiment, both in terms of technological learnings as well as business and process related?
Sure.
Jump in.
If I could take that. So the team I'm actually now leading in Barclays is not a blockchain dev team, it's an experimentation team. And it is primarily, there is a challenge, how do we solve it? And experimentation really is about having a hypothesis. If we do this, then this will happen. And then really experiment design is all about how do you capture learnings and how do you measure those learnings. So the art is figuring out, well, what's important to my business stakeholders? What's important to my compliance stakeholders? What's important to me as a technologist? And then, so if I want to learn, can I convert this type of payment into this file format? That's great. I might get an answer to that. And the technical ones are often the easiest. But then how am I going to get acceptance from my compliance guys that has actually happened in a compliant way? how am I going to get acceptance from my business teams that could deal with our legacy infrastructure? And so I think experiment design is about finding those high-value input pieces and information pieces that allow you to make a decision. If you're looking at your investment for 2016, 2017, you want to know that I'm going to split. I often say that banks, you don't do anything without starting at $5 million to do a major program, right? So if you're going to make that kind of investment, you want some more certainty that this thing is actually going to work before you start throwing real money at it. So the experimentation really is designed to say, well, what are the hits and what are the misses? A simple metaphor might just be battleships, right? We're just looking for what's going to hit.
Mm-hmm.
What I would add to that is there's a whole innovation language, right, that our innovation lab have that help with the experiment that isn't, what as a business owner, you wouldn't necessarily come in with that. So asking what if, what wows, what works, what is, so that kind of question. And also, experimentation is a very different mindset than product solutioning, right? Banks are good at creating products. They figure out what they need to put here and here and here. But this is really about fast learning. So picking the right use cases, assessing your hypotheses. In our experiment, it was that you can go point to point and eliminate hops and cost, right? That's a hypothesis because we were trying to reduce speed and reduce cost. And so you test your hypotheses and then you learn quickly and share those results and then develop your next experiment.
I'm going to look at it a different way as when to stop. Experiment, I think, gets to different people. And even in the organizations, you have metrics of what you want to accomplish. Yeah. But sometimes you get advocates that are trying to go too far. And when you're managing a business, how do you stop? Because we are still organizations, and we still have budgets for experiment and budget for client and budget for new product development. When do you realize it's gone too far because someone can't let go? Mm-hmm. And I've seen that too many times where it's like they becomes their pet project, even though it's metrics driven and we have the flow charts and every little administrative thing you need, it still becomes, I know I'm going to make it, I know I'm going to make it. And I think we as an organization, all organizations need to go, okay, but we have to be critical and sometimes just pull the plug and start on something else.
That's so true. If I can briefly follow that before Julio speaks, it's that I think there is a meme at the moment which has put a blockchain on it.
Yeah.
And I can almost imagine Beyonce, if you like it, you should have put a blockchain on it. There's a need to be really critical about, well, what is this stuff actually good at? And in the design space, why wouldn't I use a SQL server? Why wouldn't I use a centralized database? And if you can't answer that in 30 seconds, then it's not a good use case.
So actually, the way we do it is we try to organize in a way that there's the visionaries and the freaks, and then there's the business people that actually the ones that are in charge of P&L, and hopefully they pay our salaries. So it's a good people to have on your team or something. So very quickly and very early in the process, we involve them. So my background, for example, I started as a chip designer. So I started as a very freaky person, and very quickly have to talk to someone from the business that will. When I mean from the business, I'm talking about a trade finance specialist. I'm talking about someone in the back office doing settlement of securities, or from someone from payments that has been tasked with trying to make our payment systems faster and more reliable. So what we do is very early on we involve them, and it is a market economy. So we come up with ideas, we test them, we make sure that they're not stupid and they work and that kind of thing, and they have to buy it, and they have to actually fund it as well. So we can fund it like, they will fund part and we will fund part or something like that. But unless there is that collaboration, there's some skin in the game for those business leaders, we just don't do it. We shouldn't have the right to impose these things. And these have to be useful for them, so they have to be free to make the decision to use it. Mm-hmm. We are very practical people. So if there's someone buying it, we do it. Otherwise,
yeah. We would say.
Great. So you're working on all of this experimentation. You're learning that it works like it says on the tin, as Morgan put it. But seeing that it can do is different than figuring out the business application, how you want to use it. And I think that one of the more interesting questions in this space is that there are opportunities to take areas where there has previously been replication of activity, not necessarily value adding in nature, and to mutualize those. But that comes obviously with with challenges and with potentially winners and losers. How are you thinking about how to take the capabilities that you're learning about and how to use them? And where are you thinking about that being a broader activity reaching across other players within the financial ecosystem?
So I've had the good fortune of being in conversations with pretty much every blue chip and a whole bunch of startups on this topic, because I think at the exec level, it's the new black. But at the same time, I see an opportunity spectrum as almost being kind of like a curve. I can imagine a curve being, you've got your investment banking operations here at the top, which are very expensive. One client is very, very valuable. In the middle, I've kind of got my corporate banking and wealth and retail client base, and then there's this long tail that I just can't address, this long tail of kind of the unbanked. And the reason I can't address them is because my cost of capital up here has increased, so I don't want to attract more deposits because actually I'm getting less interest than the cost of having that capital on my balance sheet. So how do I see this as an opportunity? Yes, I need to improve my ROE. That will help. So let's take cost out. And I think Blythe and the guys on a panel earlier did a pretty good job of talking around the efficiencies of shared ledgers. But actually, we've also talked about the legacy infrastructure. Am I going to go rip out all of that legacy infrastructure and start sharing it with other banks anytime soon? I think that's a 5 to 10 year dream, but are we really going to get there anytime soon? No. So I've got to start looking at what opportunities do I have? And I split those broadly into 3. What approaching regulation do I have? And where might the design space of blockchain-based technologies and/or smart contracts help with that? Because there's going to be an internal drive to get that done. What cost efficiencies can I take out without open heart surgery on my legacy infrastructure? And then what are my opportunities? Barclays has a very large presence in Africa, for example. I cannot go and build a branch infrastructure in Africa. It's just not economic. But actually, it would be really nice to be able to acquire somebody where the cost of capital isn't an issue, and where I could put products around that. If there was some other sort of tokenized asset or tokenized value, that would be really, really powerful. So I see that opportunity side of it being really sort of under-articulated, but the whole spectrum is an area of opportunity, and so I look at that as a portfolio. Everything from yes, post-trade over here, but also yes, your trade finance in the middle. But then I look at it from all of my client base in utilities, in government, in GDO, and then also what can I do around acquiring new customers.
What I would maybe add to that, I think the Citi Ventures approach has been multi-pronged strategy, right? You have to work many different channels and many of them involve external partners, right? Whether it's investing, whether you partner with something to bring something to fruition, which I think, what my learning in this specific experiment is, for banks to do everything on their own, it will be very, very challenging. And I think external partners will be very important to the equation, both as providers of services and then obviously, potentially collaboration down, in the future, because blockchain is a network technology. So you need an ecosystem to really fully realize the benefits.
And we realize we can't be, everything to everyone at every time. So what we've been focusing on is what is our line of business, because we're very focused on the line of business. Who are our customers today? Who do we want our customers to be? What's our segment strategy? And then for us, it's corporate cash management. And not a lot of time, more time's been spent on retail and on securities. So we've been having fun with a small group of people, brainstorming, because, we've learned at all these events and talking to all these vendors, we've had the benefit of extremely smart people opening our eyes to different things. But not everyone's had that same baseline. So we found out sometimes going to customers and wanting to whiteboard, could you explain again what Bitcoin is? And it just wasted time. So we're sitting there going, let's do some aspirational based on what we've learned, and then go to certain customers, because we saw a benefit in cash management and liquidity management and trade processing, and painted the picture. And now's the time to go and validate, because to be agile, sometimes you have more information than others, and we want to go a little quicker and then get ideas, especially from the vendors and the fintech companies. They bring just a different view with our institutional knowledge that we have from our staff, and try to merge so that we are are really looking, and we think we've identified quite a few unique use cases where we might be able to bring some securities and cash processing together that's traditionally been separate. So where's those handoffs and those breaks that this technology may give us an opportunity the previous technologies haven't? I don't know if I answered.
I think, well, maybe the only thing I would add is that something we are seeing and something we like is that we are starting to see a lot more business people, and those are startups, business people bring in solutions using the blockchain or the distributed ledger technology, as opposed to it was before, which was technology people trying to find solutions, problems to solve, right? And this is something which I think is good, and of course those are the startups we're more interested in, and the ones we want to work because they really know about the stuff. There's a startup, good, it's called SKU Chain. I don't know if it's even in the. So SKU Chain is I mean they focus on inventory management and trade finance solutions. Well, the guy, that man over there, he actually was the captain of freight ships over the ocean just going there. So talk about that pain point. I mean, he's suffered the pain, right? I mean, he's bringing a solution to those things.
That's a really good point I'd like to briefly build on is what I've found in our Barclays Accelerator cohorts that get the most traction in industry. Typically, you find somebody who knows the pain point. So
Exactly.
Leanne Kemp, who's the founder of Everledger.io, worked in insurance for 25 years and was then able to really articulate why a censorship-resistant database is a great place to put a proof of existence of a diamond that isn't a blood diamond. There's a chap sitting downstairs at our stand from Ogie Docs. And Gadi has worked in trade finance for 12 years, has a number of client relationships already, and felt the pain day to day in trade finance, and knew that he wanted to solve one specific problem around the bill of lading, which is kind of the root cause of a lot of the paperwork and issues in trade finance.
Exactly.
So I think knowing your market, knowing the business problem you're solving is always going to be critical. And then from that, you can explain why the technology is good at it. And that takes a little bit of time, but you can actually do it. You can get people there if you link the two together. And as a brief shout out, one of the things we've done with our Rise Labs program and our Barclays Accelerator is invite startups in to co-create with us. And I think to the point that you made, we have to have partnerships. We have to have that partner network. So shout out barclaysaccelerator.com. Applications are now open. Come join us.
Plug and play accelerator, I would also add a shout out for.
Yeah.
But I think the point
Anyone
you
else
made
can put in any
also
other
is,
plugs?
what I'm finding is, who can explain the technology to us?
Yeah.
Because we're finding companies coming in and parading their solutions and trying to convince you why, but it's very hard to get here to a business person, this is what the technology does.
So true.
And that's why it's hard to get our business folks so engaged, because how's this different than a relationship database? How's this different than, don't tell me it's the internet of mail or money, tell me what technology I have that now I can try to apply to my business problem.
And Vinay Gupta from Ethereum has a really good story that he took me through a couple of days ago that I really enjoyed, in that he talked about databases dealing in fact, networks dealing in opinion. And I think really sort of having an ability for networks and databases to be kind of one and the same thing, and to have confidence around when data is moved from one organization to another, is what blockchains are really, really good at. And I think that if you can use that as your nucleus, then you've got kind of a story that makes sense for business stakeholders that I think we need to do more of. It's that simplicity that Vinay had that I really enjoyed.
Fantastic. So there would be a great temptation for me to ask you a question about regulation and about the war stories that you've had in terms of exploring that, but I'm not going to do that.
Thank you.
Instead, I think that that this is a group of people that understands well from an institutional perspective the capabilities of this, and also understand the detailed and often arcane business processes of how banks and other financial institutions run. So I'm going to turn the question on its head and ask you, how could regulators use the blockchain or other distributed ledgers to regulate you better, to make both of your lives easier and to make the whole financial system safer? I'll start with you, Julio.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's an excellent question, and I do think it's more of an opportunity than a problem. So I think it's proper to flip it around. There's a lot of effort that as banks would put together to comply with regulation and audits and so on, and many of those things are really due to the fact that people need to trust banks, right? I mean, banks are kind of the sources of trust. I mean, how much money you have in your bank account is what the bank says that you have, right? That's why this has to be audited, and it's very important to organize it well and make sure there's no internal fraud and no external fraud and all these kind of things. So the technology is actually great in terms of reducing the need for supervision and regulation. At some point, all money will be digital, right? It will be issued in some sort of distributed ledger, and then all the regulatory processes, all the audits, all these kind of things could be automated a lot, right? And so I do think it is much more of an opportunity rather than a problem. Even though the interim solutions that we'll have to pilot and we'll have to work with will still respect the role, they still leverage the role of banks as gateways to the financial system, right? Things like, for example, Ripple. It's just a distributed ledger that works underneath, but all the relationship, all the last mile, and all the custody of the money, all these things are still done like they are, like they are today. And it's important to do that because AML, KYC, all these things are important to happen. In one conference once, I said that that's the part of regulation that is actually useful. And I think these aspects are important, and in general, I think all these technologies will contribute to do this much better and much easier.
I would say regulators are there to make sure that we're being the good risk managers that we should be. And to manage risk is to look at a transaction and make sure that there's transparency and the recording and the information's correct. And the thought of what a blockchain, an open distributed ledger, a database structure can give you, and the different kind of reporting you could then produce from those data structures to look at general trends, not individual transactions, to really look at the level of risk. I think the regulators maybe aren't looking because they stop at each organization. So if you can look across a marketplace or across an equity or a digital asset and see that it's taking its right hops and it's going in the right places, these regulators, I think, would embrace it and see that this is a tool that is not just for the banks, but for the regulators.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would just add, auditability, traceability, transparency, and immutability, right? So, and it also digitize paper, right, in the process. So I think, again, it'll help have a shared copy, golden copy that regulators have and banks have, so.
Regulators feel the same pain we do. They deal with spreadsheets and manual process all the time, and it's the only tool we've got. And banking is basically predicated on the idea that we'll manage the risk up front, but also if it goes wrong on the back of it, we're the people you kick. And so that kind of works in a paper-based legal framework that we've got today. So what could be different? How might lives be easier, not just for us, but for regulators? And I think that's kind of the point you're coming to. I think regulators are in a really interesting position in that they want this, and they want to legitimize it, but they're stuck in this horrible position where they don't want to over-regulate out of existence an emerging technology, but they do want to regulate into legitimacy, because otherwise it just stays outside of banks. And so there's this really interesting dichotomy that regulators find themselves in. But I think naturally it's an opportunity, as Julio said, and dialogue will help with that. I think there's a risk of come-by-hour too much collaboration, but I think when it's pre-competitive in this stage, this is the time where there's an opportunity to collaborate. And then as it starts to get commercialized, then we go back to putting on our gloves and duking it out.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we're getting close to end of time, but I want to ask one question. You guys are working on all sorts of exciting stuff. If you think forward to 2020, and you look at the businesses that you work in today, how do you imagine that the work that's being done around the blockchain and other distributed ledgers will change your business? Pick one area where you think your operations are going to be changed by this. Julio, do you want to start, or should we start with? I mean, you look ready, Morgan.
I would say 5 years from now feels like donkey's years in London terms. It's a long way away, right? We talk about the pace of change. I think it's very, very, very early days to predict personally, but I do think it will enable to create new solutions as well as improve operating efficiencies, right? At the highest of high levels for banks. Hopefully we can offer new products and services and also improve the risk and operational inefficiencies that we have in places that haven't been really touched by technology to any great extent for quite a while, middle and back office.
I kind of hope to see financial inclusion. I really feel that's an area that this technology can make both a social and an economic difference. And if we look 5 years out, be disappointed if solutions haven't been commercialized that give people access to the financial systems that they don't have today.
Yeah, I find difficult to be excited about operational improvements, although we'll probably use that to fund stuff, hopefully. But I do agree. I think micropayments and in the context of Internet of Things and financial inclusion will probably be one of the game changers. I think one of the biggest, the whole thing will change a lot when at some point central banks decide to issue currency on distributed ledgers, and we cease to use underlying technology, keeping using the fiat currency that we have today. Like instead of using digital avatars of the physical money, actually making money digital. It's just that it's impossible to predict when that is going to happen. But when that happens, that changes everything, including the very nature of banks.
Yeah, the central banks are tremendously interested in doing that. The question isn't why or what, it's how. And I think really those last mile implementation problems can be solved with a little bit of collaboration, which is hence why you hear a lot of that term. For me personally, I think financial inclusion is a big one, but you can't include people financially without identifying them first, which is why I think ID 2020 is a really solid initiative, and we should look to collaborate around things like that.
You're right.
Yes, we'll see. I often say that in a bank, it takes 2 to 3 years to commercialize anything, no matter how much political support you've got, even if it's regulation. It's going to take some time for us to really surface a lot of these things. So in 5 years, I think we'll start to see some of those operational efficiencies things really cooking, and maybe the beginnings of some opportunity-based financial inclusion products that really don't involve, that change the nature of what deposit taking is for a bank.
Great. So from the audience, we've gotten a number of questions asking basically what type of blockchain technology are you using and why. We're almost out of time, so we won't address the why. Do you guys have favorite protocols that you're dealing with, or do we want to keep that under wraps for the moment?
I just want to make one brief point, which is I think it's an interesting design space at the moment, but there are a lot of people saying we're the whole stack. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no, you're not. Don't try and own all of it, would be my advice to the startups, because if I think of this as a design space, I think that people have got bits of it, and there are areas where some of them are really, really good here, but they're trying to do all this, and I'm like, no, just focus. Be good at that, and you'll be a billion-dollar company. So that's what I'm seeing more so than anything. There's no religious, I think, devotion to any one particular stack at the moment. It's too early to say. But I think the real power of this tech is around smart contracts, and once they come around. Anyone
else in the panel have religion?
I just won't say anything because it's not even protocols, it's the firm. And you mention the company and you think the protocol's good, next thing you know, we'll be in the paper like you were, that you mentioned this company with this firm.
Come on.
So I think until, we at a point then of actually commercializing something, it's not worth saying.
Yeah, and Citi has been testing a range of technologies, I would say, and I fully agree with Simon's comments on the stack, right, in terms of the space, and Blythe said it earlier as well, in terms of there's many parts
layers
of the stack, and they're all developing, very quickly. So
I think this has been a fantastic discussion. If I can I can be so bold as to sort of roll up what I think are some of the most interesting points, at least for me, that I've heard. I think that we've heard across the panel that this is a learning process, and it is one predicated on collaboration with a whole bunch of different entities, be those fintech players, regulators, and competitors, and traditional collaborators. Second, I think that we've heard that there's a need to closely measure what we're doing as institutions in this space, and as Cheryl put well, to know when to make the cut. And finally, I think the importance as a financial institution of knowing your market, understanding what the problems that you're attempting to solve from a business perspective are. How is it going to benefit your customer? How does it work? As Morgan, I think, put it very well. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to our audience. And,
Well done.